They say every family has secrets, but I never imagined mine was built entirely on one. My name is Ethan Marlowe. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where the winters bite through your bones and the summers smell like freshly cut grass and distant rain. But my story isn't about the seasons or the weather. It's about what lies behind closed doors, about growing up feeling like an intruder in the house that should have been my safe haven. The first thing you should know about me is that I never knew my mother. She died when I was barely 2 years old, a complication at the hospital, they always said. For years, all I had of her were old photographs. A young woman with soft eyes and a tired smile, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me? Dad remarried when I was 4. Her name was Lorraine. She came into our lives carrying the sweet scent of expensive perfume and the sharpness of words that could cut deeper than any knife. A year later, my half-brother Logan was born. From the moment he took his first breath, it felt like the sun itself decided to shine only on him. I became the shadow, the leftover, the reminder of a woman whose name no one dared say out loud. Growing up, I remember birthdays where Logan would get a mountain of gifts, a new bike, a console, sneakers that probably cost more than Dad's suit. And me? A polite pat on the shoulder and maybe a discounted shirt. If I was lucky. Lorraine would say, "Ethan, you're older, you understand these things." And maybe I did, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. School became my only escape. I studied hard, partly because I wanted to prove to them that I mattered, but mostly because books didn't look at me with disappointment. Books didn't remind me every day that I wasn't Logan. When I turned 15, I finally gathered the courage to ask Dad why he never talked about my mother. He looked at me like I had uttered something forbidden, his jaw tightening, and simply said, "Some things are better left in the past, Ethan." That was it. End of discussion. So I stopped asking. I stopped expecting. And I built a quiet world inside my head, a place where I wasn't just the unwanted son. The house itself seemed to reinforce my place in the family. Logan's room was downstairs, bright and spacious, with large windows and walls covered in soccer posters and expensive shelves. Mine was up in the attic, a sloped ceiling I kept bumping my head against, a small bed by a dusty window overlooking the alley, and walls so thin I could hear every laughter downstairs that I wasn't invited to join. But I got used to it. That's what happens when you live long enough in the shadows, you stop hoping for sunlight. As the years passed, Logan became the pride of the family. Every mediocre achievement of his was met with applause and celebration. When he passed a test, there were cupcakes and photos. When I got an A on my report card, Lorraine would say, "Well, that's what's expected of you." Expected. That word haunted me like a silent echo. Dad worked as an accountant in a small firm downtown. Lorraine was a stay-at-home mother, though most of her days seemed to be filled with brunches and gossip with neighbors. And me? I filled my hours with part-time jobs after school, stocking shelves, delivering newspapers, saving every cent I could. Not because anyone told me to, but because deep inside, I knew I had to be ready to stand on my own, because the day would come when even the attic wouldn't be mine anymore. But nothing could prepare me for what would happen years later, the secret that would pull apart everything I thought I knew about who I was and why I had been pushed aside my whole life. When I turned 18, it felt like the universe itself had set me free, though not in the way most people imagine. There was no party, no cake, no happy birthday echoing through the living room. Just Lorraine's forced smile and a stiff nod from my father across the breakfast table. Logan wasn't even home. He had a soccer tournament out of town. That morning, I made myself toast, drank coffee alone, and quietly packed my few belongings into 2 battered suitcases. I didn't leave out of anger. By then, anger had long burned itself into cold acceptance. I left because deep down, I knew the attic had never truly been mine. And if I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life trying to convince people who had already decided who I was supposed to be. With the money I had saved from part-time jobs, I rented a small studio apartment on the edge of town. Cracked walls, leaky pipes, and a single window that barely caught the morning light, but it was mine. For the first time, every inch of space belonged to me, and no one could tell me otherwise. I balanced night shifts at a gas station and early classes at the local community college. Sleep became a rare luxury, but every hour I spent working or studying felt like a brick laid into the foundation of a life I could finally call my own. Each paycheck meant another step away from the Marlowe family dining table where my silence had always been louder than words. Occasionally, Dad would call, though never for long. His voice always carried the weight of unfinished sentences, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Lorraine rarely reached out, and when she did, it was only to remind me of family events. Logan's birthday, Easter brunch, Christmas dinner. I went sometimes more out of duty than hope. I'd walk into the familiar house that smelled of polished wood and Lorraine's floral perfume, sit quietly at the edge of the table, and watch as Logan talked about college life, his friends, the trips Dad and Lorraine took him on. They never asked about my classes, my work, or my life in that small apartment. And after a while, I stopped offering details. You can only speak into silence so many times before your words feel like they don't belong to you anymore. Years went by in this rhythm. Logan blossomed under their attention, a living reflection of everything they wanted in a son. And I became a ghost who sometimes visited for holidays, someone whose name they remembered just enough to add to a text message. Yet through it all, there was one person who kept me tethered to something that felt like family. My grandfather, Henry Marlowe. Grandpa Henry lived in Cincinnati, a 3-hour drive from my apartment. He was a retired contractor who had built half the houses on his street with his own hands. His voice was rough as gravel, but his eyes softened whenever he looked at me. He never once compared me to Logan, never asked why I looked tired or why I had lost weight. Instead, he would pour us both a glass of sweet iced tea and say, "Tell me what you've been reading, Ethan." Those afternoons with him became my sanctuary. Grandpa Henry had a quiet wisdom about him, the kind you can't learn from books or speeches. He'd tell stories about building homes during Ohio's coldest winters, or how he met my grandmother at a county fair. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across his porch, he'd grow silent, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. One late summer evening, as we sat on his porch listening to cicadas, he finally spoke words that unsettled me. "Ethan, you ever wonder why your father turned out the way he did?" I hesitated, unsure what to say. Part of me had always wondered, but hearing Grandpa put it into words made it real. Before I could answer, he shook his head, as if scolding himself for even asking. "Never mind, boy. Some stories ain't mine to tell." That night, as I drove home under a sky littered with stars, his question clung to me like a burr. I thought about Dad's quiet resentment, the way he'd flinch whenever my mother's name came up, and Lorraine's coldness that went deeper than words. It felt like my whole life had been shaped by something unspoken, something buried so deeply none of them dared acknowledge it. Months passed, and life settled back into its tired rhythm until everything changed with a single unexpected phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was finishing a shift at the gas station, wiping down coffee stains from the counter, when my phone vibrated. Grandpa Henry's name lit up the screen. His voice, usually steady as old oak, trembled slightly as he said, "Ethan, I'm coming to town. I need to see you and your father. There's something I've kept too long." My heart thudded in my chest. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply agreed to meet him at my father's new house the following evening. Dad and Lorraine had moved into that new house only weeks before. Logan, now 20, had transferred to a university closer to home, and they'd proudly shared photos of the freshly painted rooms and the new backyard patio. I hadn't been invited to see it yet, and part of me hadn't wanted to go until now. As I drove home, my mind swirled with questions. Grandpa had never sounded so serious before. What was this secret he felt compelled to reveal? And why now, after all these years? The next evening, as dusk fell over the quiet neighborhood, I parked my old car across the street and stared at the house. Warm lights glowed from the windows, and laughter spilled faintly into the street. It felt like looking into someone else's life, a life I'd never truly been part of. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the walkway. My hand hovered over the doorbell, and for a fleeting moment, I considered turning back. But something in Grandpa's voice urged me forward. The door opened before I could knock. Lorraine stood there, her smile as thin and practiced as ever. "Ethan," she said, as if tasting the name on her tongue. "Come in. Your grandfather's already here." Inside, the living room smelled of polished wood and scented candles. Logan lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up as I entered. Dad stood by the fireplace, his hands buried in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. And there, in an armchair near the window, sat Grandpa Henry, his lined face set with quiet resolve. As I stepped closer, Grandpa looked up, his gaze meeting mine with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Ethan," he began, his voice low but steady, "it's time you knew the truth. About your mother. About this family." My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat. For so long I had buried my questions, convincing myself the answers didn't matter. But standing there, in the house that had never truly felt like home, I realized that knowing might change everything even if it hurt. And so, with the walls around us heavy with years of silence, I listened. Because sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free, even if it's not the truth you wanted to hear. For a long moment, the room felt painfully silent, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. I could feel the tension clinging to the air like humidity before a summer storm. Grandpa Henry sat straighter in his chair, his weathered hands resting on his knees, as though steadying himself for words that had been locked away for decades. "Ethan," he began, and even the way he spoke my name felt different, heavy, deliberate. "You've spent your life thinking you were the forgotten son, the shadow behind Logan. And you were, but not for the reason you believe." My breath caught in my throat. Across the room, Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Lorraine stood perfectly still, like a porcelain figure that might crack at the slightest touch. Logan finally set his phone down, curiosity flickering across his face. Grandpa's gaze didn't waver. "The truth is, your mother, Rebecca, wasn't just any woman your father married. She was the rightful heir to a family trust your father never told you about. A trust worth more than you could imagine." A numbness spread through my chest. "A trust?" I echoed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. He nodded. "When Rebecca married your father, the trust was set up in your name. You were supposed to inherit it at 18. But after she died, your father and Lorraine kept it hidden. They moved it, changed documents, anything to keep you from ever knowing." I turned sharply to Dad. His face had gone pale, his mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Lorraine reached out as if to calm him, but he pulled away. Grandpa took a slow, pained breath. "They used that money, Ethan. They used it to build this new house, to pay for Logan's schooling, vacations, everything. All while you were working night shifts and living in a rented room." A roaring sound filled my ears, like wind through a tunnel. I remembered every moment I had stood at the edge of their world. Every birthday dinner where my gift was an afterthought. Every time I walked back to my apartment under streetlights, convincing myself that I didn't need what they had. I felt my hands shaking. "How could you?" I whispered, though I didn't know if I was speaking to Dad, to Lorraine, or to the entire room. Dad finally lifted his eyes to meet mine. His lips moved, but his voice was dry, like paper tearing. "Ethan, it wasn't supposed to be this way." Lorraine stepped in quickly, her words sharp, defensive. "You don't understand. We did what we had to do. Logan needed stability. The family needed it. And what were you going to do with that money? Waste it on some tiny apartment?" Her words sliced through me. "It was mine." I heard myself say, louder now, my voice raw, "It wasn't yours to take." Logan sat back, his brow furrowed, his expression suddenly different, as though he was seeing me for the first time not as the half-brother who never mattered, but as someone whose life had been stolen to make his possible. Grandpa's voice broke the rising tide of anger. "Ethan, I only discovered the missing trust a few months ago. Your grandmother and I had set it aside for you. When your mother passed, your father should have safeguarded it until you came of age. But he never told you, and I couldn't find the documents until recently. I remembered all the years Grandpa had called me, asked about my life, told me stories about my mother. Maybe he had sensed there was something wrong all along. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and trembling. I thought it would help keep the family together, that you'd still find your own way, and Logan had so many needs. You were always so strong, Ethan. Strong. That word felt like another wound, as if my strength justified the betrayal. Lorraine's mask cracked, her voice rising. You don't know what it was like, raising two boys, one of whom never truly belonged. I was her son, I shouted, the words ripping from my chest. I belonged! You just refused to see it! The room fell silent again. Outside, night had settled over the neighborhood, pressing against the windows like a heavy memory. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. Grandpa's shoulders slumped, and his voice grew softer. I know this is too much to take in, Ethan, but you needed to know the truth. You've always deserved to know. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my mind struggling to wrap itself around everything he had revealed. Years of sacrifice, of loneliness, of trying to prove I was worth something, while the very people who should have protected me had stolen what was meant to give me a chance. Dad took a step toward me, his eyes glassy. I'm sorry, he said, so quietly it barely reached my ears. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my father say those words to me. But it wasn't enough. Not now. I shook my head, the weight of betrayal pressing so heavily on my chest I thought it might break me. You didn't trust me, I said. Not even enough to let me have what my mother left for me. Lorraine looked away, her arms crossed, as though bracing herself against words she couldn't face. Logan, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Ethan, I didn't know. I swear. I never knew. And somehow, in that moment, I believed him. He had grown up in the warmth I was denied, but he hadn't asked for this betrayal. Just as I hadn't asked to become the outsider, Grandpa leaned forward, the lines in his face deepened by grief. The documents have been recovered, Ethan. The trust is yours again. It can't give you back the years you lost, but it can help you build something new. Something new. The words felt both comforting and hollow. Dad opened his mouth, searching for something to say, but the distance between us had grown too wide, built over years of silence and broken trust. I turned to leave, my legs heavy, as if dragging chains behind them. As I reached the doorway, Grandpa's voice stopped me once more. Ethan, he said softly, your mother loved you more than anything. Don't let what they did steal that from you too. I paused, closing my eyes, letting the words sink in. Maybe that was the truth I had needed most of all. Then I stepped out into the night, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality. The air smelled of rain, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like the world itself echoing the storm that had broken inside our family. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but for the first time in my life, the shadows didn't feel so heavy. I don't remember the drive home that night. My hands clung to the steering wheel, but my mind drifted through memories that suddenly looked different in the light of what I'd just learned. The attic bedroom that had felt like a punishment, the nights I lay awake listening to the laughter downstairs, the quiet pride I carried whenever I paid my own bills, it all came back to me in flashes, colored now by a betrayal I could never have imagined. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence inside felt deeper than usual, as though the walls themselves understood that something had shifted. I set my keys on the small table by the door, took off my shoes, and stood there in the dim light, feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing on my chest. What do you do when the life you've built for yourself was supposed to be different from the very start? When the struggle you thought defined you was never yours to bear alone? That night, for the first time in years, I let the anger come. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe, and a sound tore from me that was part sob, part rage raw and uncontrolled. It echoed in the empty apartment, A reminder that I was, and had always been, alone. But even as the anger burned through me, something else began to settle underneath. A strange, cautious clarity. Grandpa had said that trust was recovered. That meant I had a choice, now something my father and Lorraine had denied me for so long. The thought was both terrifying and freeing. The next morning, I woke to gray skies and a rain that pattered softly against the window. I called in sick to my shift at the gas station, something I had almost never done. For years, work had been my way to stay in motion, to outrun the ache of being unseen. But now, for the first time, standing still felt necessary. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the slick streets below. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. Dark circles under my eyes, a jaw set too tightly, a face that had learned to keep its secrets. Somewhere inside that reflection, I searched for the boy I used to be, the one who had waited for his father's approval, who had wished every birthday that his mother could somehow walk through the door. I couldn't find him. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Grandpa. "If you're ready, come by tomorrow. We'll go over the documents together." His words felt gentle, an invitation rather than an instruction. Even in this, he respected what my father never had my right to choose. That evening, Logan texted me for the first time in months. "Can we talk?" it said, nothing more. For a moment, I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay wrapped in the bitterness that felt so justified. But another part, quieter and stubborn, reminded me that Logan had been as much a piece of this puzzle as I had, even if he'd lived in the warmth I'd been denied. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, one of those places with faded brick walls and scratched wooden tables that smelled of burnt espresso. Logan arrived late, rain clinging to his hoodie. He looked tired, his usual easy confidence dulled by something I couldn't quite name. When he sat down across from me, there was a hesitation in his eyes that I had never seen before. "I didn't know," he said, his voice rough, "about the trust, the money, any of it." I believed him. Logan had always been careless, selfish even, but not cruel in the way Lorraine could be. He looked down at his hands, fingers fidgeting. "I always wondered why you never really came home. I thought you just didn't care. But now you see why," I finished for him, my voice softer than I expected. He nodded. "Doesn't make it right, though. I benefited from something that was supposed to be yours." Hearing him say, it felt strange, like part of the weight I had carried for so long shifted slightly, even if it didn't disappear. "I never blamed you," I said quietly. "Not really. You were just living the life they built for you." Logan's eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no distance between us. Just two brothers different in so many ways sitting across a table, trying to understand a past neither of us had chosen. He swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted. Grandpa recovered the trust. It changes everything and nothing at the same time. Logan nodded slowly. "If you need anything, I mean it. Just let me know." Part of me wanted to reject the offer, to hold on to the anger because it felt safer, but something softer, something that still remembered the nights we were just two boys sneaking cookies from the kitchen, made me nod. "Okay," I said. "Thanks." We sat there in silence for a while, the rain blurring the world outside into shades of gray. And for the first time, it didn't feel awkward. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us had words for yet. The next day, I drove to Grandpa's house. The roads glistened from last night's rain, and the sky hung low and heavy as though it, too, carried secrets. Grandpa was waiting on the porch, a thick envelope in his hands. Inside, he showed me everything. The original trust documents, the letters my mother had written never sent to me, and the legal paperwork to transfer control back to my name. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Seeing my mother's handwriting, soft loops and careful lines made her feel real in a way photographs never could. She had written about me, about how she hoped I'd grow up brave, kind, and unafraid to follow my own path. "She loved you more than life itself," Grandpa said, his voice breaking slightly. "Don't let what your father did erase that." We sat together at the kitchen table. papers spread out before us. Grandpa explained that the trust wasn't just money, it was the chance to choose what my life could be, without the weight of someone else's choices holding me down. "You can do anything now, Ethan," he said. "Go back to school, start your own business, travel whatever you want, it's yours." But with that freedom came fear too. For so long, my life had been defined by fighting to stay afloat. What did it mean to live beyond survival? What did I truly want, when I wasn't forced to measure every decision against a bank balance and someone else's approval? That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with the documents spread out around me. The city lights flickered through the window, painting the walls and shifting gold and shadow. For the first time, I let myself imagine a different future. A life where I wasn't the forgotten son, the quiet worker in the background. A life where I could study engineering like I had once dreamed. Where I could build something of my own, not for them, but for me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city felt quiet, expectant, as though holding its breath. And somewhere deep inside, so did I. That night, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, memories I had spent years trying to bury rose to the surface moments I had tried to laugh off, to shrug away, but which had clearly left scars deeper than I dared to admit. I remembered birthdays where my father forgot to say anything at all, and I'd watch from the kitchen doorway as Lorraine baked Logan a cake so large it barely fit on the table. I remembered standing in department stores, watching Logan pick out new clothes while I was told, "You can wear what you have, Ethan." At the time, I'd told myself it didn't matter. That love wasn't measured in gifts or cake. But lying in the dark, with the truth about the trust echoing in my mind, I realized it wasn't just about money or things, it was about being seen. About being valued enough that someone would fight for me, not against me. By morning, the weight of those memories hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter, like acknowledging them had loosened their grip. I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop, something I hadn't done seriously in years, beyond paying bills and looking for extra shifts. I remembered my old dream, half buried under years of survival, engineering. When I was a kid, I used to take apart radios and old watches, curious about how they worked. I even built a homemade radio from spare parts once, and Grandpa had called me a young inventor, his eyes shining with pride. But somewhere along the way, the dream had felt impossible, a luxury I couldn't afford. Now, staring at the blinking cursor on the college's admissions page, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time: hope. It terrified me. What if I failed? What if all the years working in stores and gas stations had stolen the part of me that could have done this? But then I heard Grandpa's voice in my mind, calm and certain. Don't let them steal your future too. So I clicked Start Application. The next day, Grandpa called and asked if I'd join him for lunch. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked leather booths and coffee that smelled burnt but comforting. He listened as I told him about my decision to apply to college. His eyes softened, and he smiled in a way that reached the lines around them. "That's what your mother would have wanted," he said. "She'd be so proud, Ethan." Hearing that hurt and healed all at once. After lunch, as we were leaving, Grandpa placed a folded piece of paper in my hand. "In case you need help covering tuition or living expenses until the trust is fully transferred," he said. "No arguments." I tried to protest, but he shook his head gently. "You've done everything on your own long enough. Let someone stand with you this time." The paper was a check more money than I'd ever seen at once. Holding it felt strange, like it belonged to a version of me I hadn't yet become. But Grandpa's faith in me felt real, solid. And for the first time, accepting help didn't feel like weakness. That evening, Logan texted again. "Want to come by the house? Just to talk." Part of me hesitated. The house itself felt tainted, a monument to choices that had left me outside for so long. But curiosity, and maybe the part of me that still wanted to know why, pushed me to go. Lorraine wasn't home when I arrived. Dad was there, sitting in the living room, eyes tired. Logan stood beside him, hands in his pockets. They had been waiting for me. "We wanted to talk to you," Dad began. His voice trembled, something I'd never heard before.
Not to justify what we did, there's no excuse. But to explain, if you'll let us.
I nodded silently, my chest tight. Dad swallowed. After your mother died, I felt like I lost everything. Lorraine, she tried to help me hold what was left together. But somewhere along the way, it became about protecting what we had: Logan, the house, this life, and we forgot what we owed you. He paused, eyes glassy. I failed you, Ethan. In every way a father can fail. Hearing him say it out loud hurt more than I expected, but strangely, it also felt like a splinter being pulled free. Logan spoke next, his voice lower. I wish I'd known sooner. I grew up thinking you just didn't care, that you wanted to keep your distance. I never realized. You were kept out. I met his gaze. I know you didn't choose this, I said quietly. Logan nodded. I want to change that now, if you'll let me. The conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years I spent feeling invisible, or the nights I wondered what it would feel like to truly belong. But it was a start, a crack in the wall that had divided us for so long. When I left the house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and purple. I thought of my mother, the trust she had left for me, and the future that finally felt like it might belong to me. For the first time, I didn't look back as I walked away. In the days that followed, life settled into a strange, quiet rhythm, a rhythm I'd never known before. For the first time, the shadow of survival that had hung over every choice I made felt lighter. It wasn't gone, but it had shifted just enough to let in something new. Possibility. I spent my mornings filling out applications, writing essays that forced me to look at my own story through a lens I'd always avoided. I wrote about working nights in gas stations, about fixing broken apartment plumbing at 2 a.m. so I could keep a deposit. About learning, over and over, that silence doesn't mean peace, and that family doesn't always mean love. Typing those words felt like opening a locked door inside me. Part of me worried it sounded like self-pity, but another part recognized the truth. This was my life, unvarnished, and for the first time, I wasn't writing it to beg for sympathy. I was writing it to show that I had survived it. In the afternoons, I'd drive across town to Grandpa's house. He'd brew coffee that tasted far better than what I made at home, and we'd sit together going through paperwork, discussing tuition plans and deadlines. But we didn't just talk about logistics. Grandpa would tell stories about my mother, how she'd dance barefoot in the kitchen when a song she liked played on the radio, how she'd talk to strangers like she'd known them forever. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and try to imagine her voice. I wondered what she'd think if she saw me now. A little older, worn down in places, but maybe standing taller than before. One evening, Logan texted again. You busy? It read. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep our newfound truce at arm's length, afraid that getting too close would open old wounds. But curiosity, and maybe hope, made me say yes. We met at a rundown basketball court near the neighborhood where we'd grown up. The chain link fence rattled in the wind, and the paint on the backboard was chipped and fading. Logan brought a basketball, and for a while we didn't talk, we just played. The ball thudded against the cracked concrete, our breath turning into small clouds in the cold air. It reminded me of afternoons when we were kids, before homework and family dinners split us into separate worlds. When we finally sat on the curb, sweat cooling on our skin, Logan spoke first. I keep thinking about what you said, about how you used to watch from the stairs. I didn't know, Ethan. I swear I didn't. I know, I said quietly. It wasn't your job to know. You were just a kid too. He nodded, exhaling a shaky breath. I guess I always thought you didn't need us. You seemed so distant. I had to be, I admitted. Needing people who don't want you, it hurts more than being alone. Logan winced, as if the words cut deeper than I'd intended. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing it. His apology didn't erase everything, but it mattered. It made the years feel a little less lonely. As we left the court, he stopped me. If you get into college, will you let me come to your graduation one day? The question caught me off guard. Yeah, I said, surprised by how easily the answer came. Yeah, I'd like that. Days turned into weeks. I worked shifts when I could, studied in every spare hour, and waited anxiously for emails that might change everything. Grandpa kept telling me, "Be patient, Ethan. You've waited years, what's a few more weeks?" One cold Thursday afternoon, as I checked my email on my phone outside the gas station, I saw it. An email from the admissions office. My heart pounded so hard I had to sit down on the curb before opening it. "Congratulations." The word blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had done it. Not because someone had opened a door for me, but because I had kept knocking even when it felt pointless. That night, I drove to Grandpa's house to tell him. He pulled me into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the air out of me. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered. His voice cracked, and for a moment, the years between us disappeared. We were just family, no secrets, no lies. Later, sitting alone in my car, I let myself dream about what might come next. Classes, lectures, nights spent studying not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Maybe even friends who knew me for who I was, not for the family I came from. But alongside hope came fear. What if I failed? What if I wasn't enough? What if, after all this, I proved them right? Then I thought of my mother's letters, of Grandpa's faith, of the boy I used to be, watching from the stairs, who had promised himself that one day he'd step into the light. For him and for me, I decided I'd try. Starting college wasn't the instant transformation I had once imagined. The first morning, I woke before dawn, my stomach tight with nerves that coffee couldn't calm. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked almost the same: dark circles, careful eyes, but there was something else too. A quiet determination, the kind that can only come from years of fighting battles no one else sees. The campus felt impossibly big at first, with its stone buildings and wide green lawns. Students moved in clusters, laughing over coffee or walking quickly with backpacks weighed down by books I'd never owned. For a few days, I moved like a ghost among them, present, but not quite part of their world. In lectures, I kept to the back row, notebook open, trying to hide the shaking in my hands when I wrote. It had been years since I'd studied anything beyond what life forced me to learn. How to stretch a paycheck, how to read people's faces to guess if today would end in silence or shouting. Sitting in classrooms again felt both comforting and terrifying. Sometimes, I caught myself expecting someone to tap my shoulder and say, "You don't belong here." But no one did. One afternoon, in a math class that felt like it spoke a language I had almost forgotten, the professor solved an equation on the board and turned, looking straight at me. "Does that make sense?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded, voice barely above a whisper, "Yes." And for the first time, I meant it. Outside of class, life was quieter but not easier. My apartment was still small and drafty, with paint peeling near the windows and a heating system that groaned at night. The trust Grandpa had recovered helped cover tuition, but I still worked weekend shifts at the gas station to pay for groceries and keep a piece of the independence I had fought so hard to build. Sometimes after late shifts, I'd drive past the neighborhood where I grew up. The houses looked almost the same, windows glowing with warm light. For a moment, I'd imagine my younger self at one of those windows, watching the family inside laugh over dinner, believing that maybe next time the laughter would include him. It never had. But I wasn't that boy anymore. One Friday night, Logan texted me, "Want to grab dinner?" Part of me hesitated. Old habits die hard, but I agreed. We met at a small diner, cheap burgers and 2 sweet milkshakes, but it felt like neutral ground. He asked about college, about classes, about what I wanted to do next. I found myself talking more than I expected, about wanting to work in renewable energy, about the hope of designing something that made life better for someone else. As I spoke, Logan listened, really listened, and didn't interrupt. Then he surprised me. "I wish Mom and Dad could hear you talk like this," he said softly. I stiffened, the old anger rising in my chest. "They had years to listen," I said. "I know," Logan replied, "and it's their loss. I'm just saying. I'm proud of you." Hearing that from him unasked, unexpected landed differently than I thought it would. It didn't erase the past, but it felt like a small stone lifted from the pile I carried. The weeks turned into months. Slowly, I began to feel less like an outsider on campus. I made friends, not many, but enough. People who didn't know my history, who saw me only as the person I was becoming, not the boy I had been. Grandpa called often, sometimes just to ask about classes, other times to tell stories about my mother I had never heard. Each story made her feel closer. A woman who loved old bookstores, who burned toast every morning but laughed about it, who had dreamed big dreams for the child she'd barely had time to hold. One evening, Grandpa told me something that stayed with me. "Your mother believed kindness was strength," he said. "She would have wanted you to live, really live, not just survive." Those words stayed with me, because for so long, I had measured my worth by what I could endure. Now, for the first time, I wondered what it would mean to measure it by what I could build. Around midterms, Dad called me. Just seeing his name on my phone froze me in place. We hadn't spoken properly since the day he admitted what they'd done. "Ethan," he began, voice rougher than I remembered. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but would you come to dinner? Lorraine wants to talk. Just the three of us." Part of me wanted to say no. Another part, the stubborn part that still remembered being that boy on the stairs, said yes. The dinner was awkward from the start. Lorraine tried too hard, her smile brittle at the edges. Dad cleared his throat too often, words stuck somewhere between guilt and habit. Finally, Lorraine spoke. "I can't undo what we did," she said, voice shaking. "I don't expect you to forgive us, but I wanted to say it. I'm sorry. Truly." I looked at her, the woman who had been a shadow over so many years of my life, and for a moment, I saw past the anger to the fear in her eyes. Fear of what she had lost, fear that it might be too late. "I'm not sure I can forgive you," I said honestly, "but thank you for saying it." The semester's end was approaching faster than I wanted to admit. Each day brought a new wave of challenges, papers to write, projects to finish, exams to study for, and yet, beneath the stress, I could feel something stirring inside me. A sense that, despite everything, I was carving out a place where I belonged. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of classes and late shifts, I sat in my cramped apartment, staring at the stack of textbooks on my kitchen table. The hum of the old heater filled the silence, along with the occasional creak of the building settling. I thought about how far I'd come from that lonely kid watching family dinners from the stairs to this moment. A young man with a future, fragile but real. I pulled out a photo Grandpa had sent me, a faded image of Mom standing in the sunlit kitchen of our old house, smiling as if she knew secrets no one else did. Her eyes sparkled with warmth and kindness, qualities I felt I was only beginning to understand. That night, as I lay on my creaky bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The scars I carried weren't just marks of pain, but proof of survival. Proof that I had weathered storms that could have broken me. A few days later, I received a call from Grandpa. "Ethan, I have something to show you," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. When I arrived at his house, he led me into his study, a room filled with blueprints, dusty books, and photos of construction sites from decades past. He pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but carefully preserved. "This belonged to your mother," he explained. "She kept it when she was your age. It's full of her dreams, her ideas for a better world. She wanted to build things that help people, bridges, homes, energy solutions." I flipped through the pages, amazed by the sketches and notes written in her elegant handwriting. It felt like a bridge connecting me to a woman I never truly knew. "Maybe," Grandpa said quietly, "you're meant to finish what she started." That thought stayed with me. I began to see my studies not just as a path to a degree, but as a way to honor her memory, to build something lasting. The next months were intense. I balanced coursework and work, often running on little sleep, but each challenge felt like a step closer to the life I wanted. Logan and I grew closer too. We shared stories about our childhood, our hopes and fears. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was becoming a friend. Sometimes we'd sit quietly, The weight of unspoken apologies between us, and sometimes we'd laugh real laughter that filled the spaces where hurt used to live. One cold winter night, as snow blanketed the city, I received a message that shook me, a letter from my father. He wanted to meet. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but something inside me told me this meeting was important. We met at a small cafe, its warm lights and soft music a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Dad looked older, weariness etched deep in his face. He apologized again for the years of neglect, for the hurt he caused. But more than that, he spoke of regrets and hopes, of wanting to be better, not just for Logan, but for me too. I listened, my heart torn between anger and a desire to believe in change. When I left that night, the cold air felt different, not biting, but cleansing. Graduation day arrived like a sunrise after a long night. Walking across the stage, I felt every hardship, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt crystallize into something powerful, hope. Grandpa's proud smile was the brightest thing in the room, and when I caught Logan's eyes, I saw something I hadn't before: a promise. A promise that whatever the past held, the future was ours to build. As I stand now, ready to step into the world beyond college, I know the journey isn't over. There will be challenges, heartbreaks, and moments of loneliness. But I also know that I am no longer the boy on the stairs, invisible and unheard. I am Ethan, a survivor, a builder, a man who has found light in the shadows and is ready to shine. The weeks after graduation were both thrilling and terrifying. I found myself standing on the edge of a vast unknown, a place where my past no longer defined me, but my future was still a blank page. For the first time, I could make choices that weren't dictated by my parents' expectations or haunted by the shadows of old wounds. The weight of that freedom was heavier than I had anticipated. I landed my first job at a small renewable energy startup, a place where ideas mattered more than degrees, and where I was valued for my passion and grit rather than my family name. The work was challenging, often frustrating, but every project I touched felt like a step toward the future I dreamed of. I wasn't just building a career, I was building a new identity. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the journey that brought me here. The boy who once watched from the stairs, feeling invisible and unwanted, had grown into a man determined to create light from darkness. Yet, the scars from my past still ached, reminding me that healing was not a destination but a process. One evening, after a long day, I found a letter slipped under my apartment door. The handwriting was unfamiliar but careful. It was from my mother's sister, a woman I'd only met once as a child. She wrote of memories I had never known, tales of my mother's kindness, her dreams, and her regrets. She offered an invitation to come visit, to reconnect with the side of my family that had remained silent for too long. The prospect both terrified and excited me. Was this another chance for connection or a reopening of old wounds? After nights of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided to go. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to face the parts of my past I had long avoided. The visit was surreal. Walking into my aunt's cozy home, filled with photographs and warmth, I felt a strange mix of belonging and alienation. She spoke gently, never prying but always present. Slowly, she unraveled stories of my mother's life, painting a portrait of a woman I could finally understand. Through her, I learned that love and family could take many forms, not always perfect, but real and meaningful. As I left her home days later, I felt a piece of my soul mending, a bridge built where there had been a chasm. Back in my apartment, the phone rang. It was Logan. His voice was hesitant but hopeful. "Hey, Ethan. I was wondering if we could talk. Really talk." I agreed. The conversation was raw and honest, filled with apologies and promises. We weren't just brothers by blood anymore, we were choosing to be brothers by heart. In that moment, I realized that family wasn't just about shared history or genetics. It was about forgiveness, growth, and the courage to keep trying. Looking out at the city lights that night, I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time, I felt ready. Life, I realized, was rarely a straight line. Just when I thought I had started to piece together the fragments of my past and build a future on my own terms, the shadows of old secrets crept back with a vengeance. It began one cold morning when a letter arrived, stamped with the official seal of a law firm I'd never heard of. The pages inside were dense, legalese filling every inch, but one phrase struck me like a punch. Estate settlement regarding the late Gregory Marston. My father had passed away. I felt the world tilt beneath me, a mix of numbness and disbelief. He was gone without a chance for final words, for healing the wounds between us. The letter detailed the division of his assets, the house, investments, and a sum of money that was now my responsibility. But beneath the paperwork, something darker lurked. There was mention of a sealed will, one that no one in the family had seen. The law firm requested my presence to discuss its contents. That same day, I called Grandpa. His voice was grave. "Ethan, your father's life was complicated. There are things you don't know yet. This might explain a lot." The meeting with the lawyer was tense. In a dimly lit office, I learned that my father had left a document that challenged everything I thought I knew about my family. The will revealed that, years ago, my mother's death was not a simple tragedy, but involved medical negligence that had been quietly covered up. Worse, it hinted at financial manipulation within the family. Money that should have been mine was diverted elsewhere. The realization hit me hard. My father and stepmother had not only marginalized me emotionally, but had conspired to erase my rightful place in the family legacy. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of betrayal heavy on my chest. The man who had cast me aside was gone, but the scars he left still burned. That night, I wandered the empty streets of Ohio, the cold biting at my skin, but unable to freeze the storm inside me. How could justice be served when the person responsible was no longer here to answer? How could I reclaim what was stolen, not just in money, but in love and dignity? But as dawn broke over the horizon, a flicker of resolve sparked within me. I wouldn't let the past define me. I would fight not just for what was mine, but for the truth to be known. The next weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, painful family confrontations, and moments of profound loneliness. But through it all, Logan stood by my side. Together, we navigated the murky waters of inheritance and secrets, uniting as brothers in ways we never had before. One afternoon, as we sifted through old family documents in a dusty attic, I found a box labeled simply, "For Ethan." Inside were letters from my mother, letters she had written but never sent, filled with hope for my future and apologies for the pain that surrounded us. Reading her words, I finally understood. Despite everything, I was loved. I had been loved from the very beginning. That night, sitting by the fireplace in Grandpa's home, I allowed myself to finally exhale. The path ahead was still uncertain, but the journey had changed me. From a boy cast in the shadows, I had become a man who claimed his light. And when Logan clapped me on the shoulder and said, "We're family! We always have been," I knew it was true. The final months following my father's passing and the revelation of the will were a storm of emotions and battles, both legal and personal. Yet in the eye of that storm, something I never expected began to take shape: peace. The court proceedings dragged on longer than I had hoped. The documents, the testimonies, the tangled web of deceit within my family's history, it was exhausting. But each piece of evidence brought me closer to, not just reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but uncovering the truth buried beneath years of silence and lies. Throughout this ordeal, Grandpa was my anchor. His wisdom was a steady flame in the darkest nights. He reminded me, time and again, that justice wasn't just about money or property. It was about restoring dignity and rewriting the story that had been twisted for so long. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling hearing, I sat alone in the courthouse courtyard. The air was crisp, leaves swirling in the autumn breeze, and for a moment, I let the weight of everything settle. The ache of the past, the loss, the betrayal, it all pressed down like the cold Ohio wind. But then my phone buzzed. It was Logan. "Dinner tonight? I've got something to show you." I hesitated but agreed. The familiar comfort of family, fragile though it was, had become something I craved. At the small diner where we met, Logan pulled out an old, worn envelope. Inside were pictures I'd never seen before of my mother and me as a baby. Smiling, laughing, moments frozen in time that contradicted the stories I'd been told. Along with the photos was a letter from Susan, my stepmother. It was an apology, not the hollow kind, but one written from the heart. She confessed her regrets, the guilt she carried for the years I was neglected, and her hope that someday I could find it in my heart to forgive. I read the letter twice. The woman who had once been a symbol of rejection had, in her own way, been trapped by her fears and mistakes. I realized forgiveness wasn't about excusing what happened, but freeing myself from the chains of bitterness. I looked at Logan, who had waited patiently. "Maybe it's time," I said softly, "to start healing." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I reached out to Susan, not to rebuild what was broken overnight, but to open a door, a chance for understanding. We met in a quiet cafe, years of tension hanging between us like thick fog. We didn't erase the past, but for the first time, we shared our truths without anger or blame. It wasn't easy. Tears came and so did laughter. Old wounds began to close. Around the same time, Grandpa and I began working on a project inspired by my mother's dreams, a community center focused on sustainable energy and education. It was a way to honor her memory and give back to the town that had shaped me. Every brick laid, every light installed, felt like a step toward the future I had fought so hard to claim. Looking back, the boy I was the one who felt invisible and unloved seems almost like a stranger. Yet, I carry him with me, not as a burden, but as a testament to resilience. My story isn't just about pain or betrayal. It's about the power of hope, the strength of family, and the courage to forge your own path even when the past tries to hold you back. And now, as I stand on the threshold of a new chapter, I am ready, not defined by the shadows of my past, but illuminated by the light I have found within. I am Ethan Marston, and this is only the beginning.